Hello, everyone. Welcome back for our last week of Special Ed Socials for the summer. We are so excited for week 6, talking all about getting our classrooms ready, set up, back to school time, because we are almost there, believe it or not. Do you guys believe that? We are almost there. It's crazy. I know I'm in my last week of ESY right now. And so we are totally wrapping up ESY. And then we have a couple weeks and it's the school year and it's like go, go, go time right now. Totally. So of course we have Jen, Ashley, and myself here today. I think Dawn will be on in a little bit. If not, no big deal. We're just going to keep going without her. So we're going to talk all about things for your classroom, anything that you need to set up, back to school routines, expectations, all those things are the first day jitters because we know we all have them. And so, of course, we're going to cover some questions that we've kind of heard throughout the audiences over our time these last couple of weeks about like the anticipation for back to school. But of course, if we don't hit on a certain topic or anything, or if you have any other questions, you are welcome to leave a comment on this live. Or if you're watching it recorded, you can also comment and we will make sure to get those questions answered. On the Sunday, we will do a Q&A and post that by 2 p.m. Eastern time as well, so that you have all of your questions answered if we don't find it directly in the Facebook group. So yeah, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with the first question that we have. And it is, what types of activities do you teach on the first days or that first week of school? Because it's highly anticipated. We want to make sure we're prepared. Jen, what do you do?
So on the first days or even week of school, I don't teach any academics. And I feel like for some teachers, that's kind of a shocker. Like they're like, oh no, what do you mean? Like that's what a lot of our jobs are based around, right? Is teaching academics, reading, math, all those things. But actually those first few weeks of school and days, I am not. I am teaching our procedures. I'm teaching our schedules. I'm teaching our classroom rules, the expectations. We're doing a lot of modeling of how to do different things. And it will vary depending on the age group that you're working with. If you're with younger students, you're going to be doing a lot of modeling and saying things over and over again. As they get a little older, you would hope that they pick up on some of those skills. But I will say, as a former middle school teacher and self-contained, it's not always the case. And so you may find yourself also doing some of that, lots of modeling, lots of practice with different things. I will say, I know the best way my students learned was by doing. So I would model how to do something. So let's say lining up to go to lunch for the day. So my paraprofessionals and I would model by actually getting up, pretending like we're getting out of our seats, walking, showing how we expect them to do that activity or that skill, and then and then allow the students to have a turn to try it, and then providing them feedback. And you just do that a lot those first few days of school, those first weeks. And you can always throw in books and children. I love children's books for expectations and setting expectations and reading those to the students. It kind of provides a little more context for them sometimes. Talking about the rules, if you have students that can talk out those scenarios and things, why it's important to walk when we go to line up instead of running, all of those things are kind of what you should be teaching those first few weeks of school. And then of course, procedures, way you expect things to be done. So how do you expect them to come into the classroom in the morning? How do you expect them to pack up to leave? How do you expect them to complete their independent work? All of those things. And I would actually recommend making a list. Make a list of all the things that you expect your students to be able to do at the beginning of the year, and maybe a little bit of what you expect them to do maybe towards the middle of the year, and start work and make those the lessons that you're actually using during those first few days and weeks of school.
Yeah, and I have a classroom freebie for setting up your classroom that goes over some of those things that you need to think about. Routines for the bathroom. How do they ask to go take a drink? How do they ask for a break? All those types of things. Because Jen, I am totally with you too. I don't teach academics that first couple weeks of school. I'm getting to know my students. I'm doing a lot of collaboration with staff of maybe a previous teacher or related service that might know the student a little bit more. And building that trust and rapport is so important, along with those routines and expectations, because it is a little different for each teacher. So imagine a new student coming to you, they're kind of afraid. I always tell the story that I used to have a student who the first week of school, he sat in a tent. That was the safe spot for him. He didn't understand like why he was in a new building with new teachers, with no classmates that he knew. So, and I knew that coming in that he was going to have a hard time. And so I kind of taught him that he could go and sit in this tent, and he would just like close himself in the tent for the first week of school. But then I had him for 3 years when I was in middle school, and by 8th grade, he was sitting at his desk with everybody else. I mean, it was a progression. Like by the middle of 6th grade or so, he was back at his desk. But you know, that time took to build the relationship, build that rapport, understand those expectations, and modify them when needed. So yeah, I love that. So we kind of talked about it a little bit, but I'm going to dive a little bit more into how do you set up your classroom rules and your expectations, because I think that's another big one that we want to make sure that we are prepared for. And so I've done it 2 ways. The first way is I've come up with the rules myself. You know, this is what I expect from you as the students of the classroom. This is what you should expect from me as the teacher of the classroom, as the paraprofessionals or assistants in the classroom. And I kind of do those like pre-done, like sit at your desk, raise your hand, those types of things. And then my last couple of years of teaching, I switched it up. I had asked my students, what do you want to be the rules? Do you think that people should be running around the classroom, and kind of laid it out a little bit. A book I really like to read, since Jen mentioned a book, is What Should Danny Do? In his school day, I think was a great opener to be like, hey, like everybody's destroying the toys. Is that what we should be doing? And it brought on a lot of great conversations for my students to really think about. And so you can do it either way. You can just kind of have the preset standard types of classroom rules, like if I ask for help if we need, line up at the door if that's something you want to do, or don't line up at the door. And so just kind of having that conversation too, either with your paraprofessionals or with your students, to kind of bring them in on those conversations too. It's really kind of fun. So Ashley, what are some examples of expectations and procedures that you've taught in your classroom? Because I know your classroom is just a little bit different.
Yes. So in middle school, same thing. We did a lot of like the modeling. What should a classroom look like? We would like play a game where I would like throw a slide up and say something like, Johnny's running around the classroom to get the teacher's attention. Is this a good choice or a bad choice? You know, and just kind of see what they knew, or a lot of modeling like that. But then in elementary school, what the teacher did, which I thought was great because it gave the kids ownership, very similar to what you both had said. Like they broke up into groups, and then they all picked 4 things they thought were important for the classroom. They came back together as a class, and then like universally like chose, like as a group, as a whole, like, okay, we feel that these, I think they picked 8, you know, these 8 are the most important, and they wrote them, and then they all signed it. And I think it makes it better. So like when children are acting out or having trouble following, you can say, hey, remember when we did this in the beginning of the year and you thought this was really important? So for like, if you're working in a self-contained room, you could print visuals and say like, which one is the best option? Make it a game, make it fun, put things on the walls, like, you know, teach them what's expected of them when they're doing work, what's expected of them when they're in the hallway, in the restroom, in the cafeteria. Chunk it like that. And then if you have time, go and look at those places and go and say, okay, show me how you should be acting in the class. Show me how you should be acting in the cafeteria. And if they don't, like, then you act silly and say, how would you handle that? In pre-K, we do a lot of modeling, a lot of visuals, a lot of redirection, a lot of reminders, you know, things like that. And a lot of, you know, oh, look, a lot of positive reinforcement when they're doing exactly what you're expecting them to do. So I hope that answered the question. I know there's a lot of different ways you can set the examples, but every classroom is different, and every expectation of teachers is different. So think about those areas of the classroom and even chunk it, or like you said, get your kids involved, do books, things like that.
Yeah, a lot of that we could already be doing this summer without our students, and thinking about those types of procedures and expectations and rules, if that's something you want to implement as well. So let's talk a little bit now about like, hey, you got the keys to your classroom, come on in. And then you walk into a room that's, you know, tables are typically lifted up off the floor because they've waxed. If anybody else's school gets waxed over the summer, like we cannot go into our building. So usually the tables and chairs are like either in the hallway or like sometimes stacked on top of each other. And I remember that overwhelming feeling about like trying to figure out how to set up your classroom when you have all this space and all this furniture, or maybe no furniture at all. Like, how do I get that? Because I've been in that situation too. So thinking about coming into your classroom for the first time, I know a lot of people have new jobs coming in the fall. Ashley, how do you set up for an early childhood classroom? Like the first thing when you get in, if you're talking about the physical space.
You nailed it on the head. When I walked into my classroom last year, it was my first year doing ECSE. I had an idea of what the classroom looked like previously. And I walked in and there was literally nothing. There was like a bookshelf and I had 2 little things to hold toys. And I was like, and some tables. And I was like, all right, what do I need to do here? Like I panicked. However, what I learned was after like my first day, I learned what is the expectation of me as a teacher? Like, what do I have to have? Certain areas, certain things. And yes, I needed to have certain centers. So that helped me. I drew it out, made my husband come because I can write things out. I'm like, but will this fit here? Because like my measuring is like, ooh, look, it looks okay. Yeah, it fits. And he's like tape measurer, so different. So I was like, I need you to come and just visually say, will all of these centers fit? And I knew I needed an art center. I needed a dramatic play center, a block center, which is like toys. And then I needed a reading center. Plus, I needed to set a place for the carpet. So you have to map out your room, look at it, see what you need. And if you don't have things, I think we've talked about this in previous things, like go on Facebook, do a donors choose, Amazon wish list, find things, ask other teachers in your building. Like, hey, do you have a bookshelf you're not using or like a divider? But as an ECS teacher, the biggest thing was that you could see the entire room, that nothing was blocked off. So you could see all those little friends at all times because you never know. And then think about like your monkey kids. Like I love my little monkeys. I have a few that love to climb, and you have to really get into the zone of like, I'm a 3-year-old and I want to climb something, like making sure that things are not accessible to other things, like a bookshelf's not accessible to a ledge you got to be creative. Almost think like you're a 3-year-old and what could go wrong. Like it sounds crazy, but it's true.
Yeah, that's totally right. And you have to almost get into the eyes of the students of like, okay, where can I climb? What can I do? Because this is fun. I know lots of my classrooms have to bolt things to the wall because of that situation, because we want to have sections in our classroom, but sometimes they just have to be a little secured to the wall. So I'm going to chat a little bit about life skills classroom. So if you have a self-contained classroom, maybe you're working more on those independent functioning type of skills. Some of the things that I like to consider when setting up my classroom is there a bathroom in my classroom? Because we're going to work on hygiene, grooming, self-care, all of those things. And toileting is sometimes part of that. And so where is the closest bathroom if I don't specifically have a bathroom in my classroom? That's a big part of it, so that I know, okay, we need to have that time in our schedule, right? Trying to think ahead a little before I create my schedule. Like we need to make sure that there's designated times that everybody can go use the bathroom. The other thing that I think about is the kitchen. Is there a kitchen accessible in your classroom or local? Do you need to sign up for that? I know that's maybe not something you can do, but like you get a toaster oven for your classroom. You can get a microwave for your classroom if you're looking to do some small things, a blender even, just start small. If you want to bring some type of kitchen supplies into your classroom, just thinking again about that life skills types of things. Is there a laundry machine? Is there laundry accessible? And can we do something like that as we go into it? Maybe you have a higher group of maybe high school students or transition age students. And if you're thinking about maybe some jobs, is there school jobs that could be implemented, or a station to have a job center in your classroom that you can make it more functional and meaningful? So just trying to think about all those life skills types of things beyond the like, here's academics at our desk. And then Jen, why don't you talk a little bit about an autism type classroom and what might be involved in that?
Yeah, so a lot of the things Heather mentioned in life skills can also lend themselves well to if you have an autism specific classroom, meaning most of the students in your classroom are diagnosed with autism. That's the type of classroom I was in, although occasionally I'd have a student with just intellectual disabilities or another disability in there as well. The biggest thing for me when I was in my autism classroom and thinking about how to organize my space was I always wanted to think about how could my students easily transition from one area of the classroom to another, because I especially liked to keep my students busy And I don't say busy in a bad way. I say, important things, whether it's academics, whether it's functional, whether it's communication based, behavioral based, whatever we're working on, I want them busy. I want them working the entire time. So a lot of times I would try to figure out how can I minimize that transition time to be as short as possible, because we know when we're keeping students, and this is any student, not just students with disabilities, but any student actively engaged in something, they're less likely to have behaviors. They're less likely to get off task. So that was a lot of how I tried to work on organizing my classroom. So I would think about, okay, if I had students work in this area first, then we're going to another area. Can I make that maybe the shortest distance possible or the easiest way possible for them physically to get there to decrease that off-task behavior, which could be things like elopement. It could be, knocking something over. It could be talking to somebody nearby as opposed to moving on to the next thing. So a lot of times I was thinking, how can I make that space in my classroom work for the behaviors that may happen? Also, students that are reluctant to transition. So how can I make it easier for them to move from one space to another if they don't like to transition spaces? Or how do I bring the work to them? If they don't want to transition, fine. You can hang at that table. I'll bring the work over to you and you can work. So thinking about those ways of organizing your classroom space. And then another thing that I really heavily focused on in my classroom was having access all over the classroom to visual supports and behavioral supports, our working for boards, our first then schedules, our visual schedules. Did I have those all in places that were accessible? Like Ashley had talked about, keeping all your students in eyes view, but keeping all those visuals at reach for both the staff and the students so that anybody that needed to use them. And then on top of that, the communication that we needed. So did my students have an area where their AAC devices could go that lended for them to be able to communicate with us? It wasn't across the room. We had a table next to where they were working so that it could sit there, that they could work. Or did the communication boards that they needed, were they in that area? So thinking about all the things that you're going to use that are going to support, especially in autism, we were always focused on behavior and communication and building those skills up and then going from there when it came to academics and functional skills. So those were kind of some of the things I was always looking for when I thought about organizing my classroom space.
Yeah. There's actually one thing that you didn't mention that I was waiting for you to.
Oh, independent work.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously we talked about it, last week or the week before? I think 2 weeks ago, independent workstations. So like Heather had mentioned in life skills, you have a life skills center or a job work center, making sure you have that independent work area set up for your classroom for students to work independently. So you're going to look for things like shelves to store the tasks. You're going to need an area for the student to work. You may decide if you want something for the students to put the tasks in when they're completed, a laundry basket, a bin, a shelf where they put them, something of that sort. So those are all some other things you want to add in when you're thinking about organizing your space. How can students, just like I said earlier, that transition process as well during independent work is a big one too. You don't want them to have to walk across an entire room to get their work bins. You want to keep it close by. And then I just remembered one other thing you want to keep in, and I don't think any of us touched on it, but it works in all settings, is thinking about where you're going to put your paraprofessionals. So, are they going to run a station? If they are, where's that station going to be? Are they going to be just modeling and circling the room and walking around? So thinking about having a space for them. Do they need a chair to sit in because they want to hang back and not be right on top of the students? Do they need a desk? Do you not have a desk? Do you want a table? So thinking about paraprofessionals too, when you're organizing your classroom space and how you're going to incorporate them as well. So hopefully that didn't overwhelm.
No. And I'm going to add more.
Throwing all of those things. I mean, it's a lot. It really is. So if any of you all, while you're listening to us, hear us say all of these things, one, know that you can change anything you want at any time. But also, if you need help, reach out to us. Just say like, hey, I'm trying to get all these spaces in my classroom. How would you do it? And we'd be happy to help any of you individually out.
Yeah. And I'm going to add a couple more because I know everybody hears them and the things that you should have in your classroom, like a classroom library. Like I used those like milk crate bins as my classroom library because I just didn't have I had a huge classroom. If anybody remembers me teaching in my classroom, it was gigantic. So like, don't tell me I don't have enough space for a library, but it wasn't meaningful for my students. Everybody said, you should have a library. You should have a library. And I just didn't find it as meaningful. They were accessible. My students can go pick up books if they wanted to. So I made it part of their little calming corner. So I did have a small space in there. That's another space that you could add with like a crash pad or a bean bag or a rocking chair. My students loved rocking chairs. Or the bouncy like spider chair where it's got like the bungees. I call it the spider chair. Or like anything else calming, regulatory that is away from an activity, a space where they can take a break. I think that is another great thing to implement. And then also talking about my very large classroom, it was like straight point to the back of the room. And so like kids could run back and forth. And so I had to get dividers. And so I had to break up the space a little bit so that there were times that they could have the run of the room. And there were times that I needed to close off part of the room so that we could do instruction. You can stay in the front of the classroom where we're doing instruction. So just think about all these things. And you know what? If you don't think about it, your students will tell them to you. They'll figure it out. They'll show you and you'll go, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about the fact that the student's desk is right next to the door, and they elope. And then you go, okay, well, we need to move them around because that's just how it happens. So I know we talked a little bit about routines and expectations, but can we go a little bit more in depth about the actual procedures of what might look like for early childhood, elementary? And Ashley, you want to start us off with that of like, really, what does it look like, the nitty gritty?
Yes. Okay. So ECSE, you can do it multiple ways. I did color coding in the kids' picture. So for them to, one, recognize their face because not all students can, and two, they were assigned a color. Their color was the spot on the floor with their picture on the floor. Like I literally used a piece of like Astro Brights. It was red, put it on the floor with their picture and then like packaging taped over it. If you're an ECSE teacher, put packaging tape on your Amazon wish list. We went through like 20 rolls last year. Like that is your best friend. And then their cubby had red tape around it with their picture. Everything had their name, their picture, and the color that was assigned to them. Their IE, everything went with that. So think if you wanted them to go to kitchen, I had their name, their picture with their name under it, and it was on a red piece of paper, and I held it up, and I'm like, we're going to kitchen. Like it was very cut and dry. And that also helped my para and anybody else that came into the room, like because the kid's picture and name was there. So we had a sub come in. It was much easier for them to understand the kids and things like that. I had literally step-by-step visuals for every kid. We would model it. Okay, we're going to literally unzip coat, hang up coat, unzip backpack, hang up. It was so step-by-step. Some kids, they had like a little flip book and they could just do it on their own because they were older. But a lot of my kids that came in, it was their first placement ever. So we did a lot of repetition. And break it down, make it very like, and it could just be a picture of a coat. It could be a picture of a backpack. And then you model it and help them like hand over hand assist, see what they can do. But when I say like you break it down, like it is step-by-step, make it as easy as possible. Everything is labeled in your room. Like Jen said, we had visuals at every single center, have multiple backups because you never know when a kid's going to throw it away, step on it, rip it, whatever. Have multiples ready to go. You can just pull them out. If your speech pathologist comes in, make sure she has a set. I'm sure she'll have her own, or they'll have their own too, but still make it as easy as possible so that if someone comes into your classroom to observe, you can say, here's the communication chart we use. If you're talking to Johnny, you need to use this when speaking with them. I had a cheat sheet for my kids too that basically said like in my bathroom, this kid was toilet trained, this kid was not, and what they were able to do and not do at that time. Like what could they do independently? What did they need assistance with? Everything was labeled, like overwhelmingly labeled. I don't know if that's like a true term, but like it made it idiot proof for myself to be like, where did I put this? Everything's labeled. Elementary, I would do a lot of the same things. Have a system that shows them their morning routine, their packing up routine, labeled their desk, or if you're going to do independent stations or tasks, like are they going to have a chart that's going to show them how to go from one place to another? Have a visual schedule present. I did have that in ECSE as well. Tell them their expectations. How are they going to know when something is done and when something is to begin and when they are supposed to transition and when they're supposed to go to lunch? Like prep them for everything. And just visuals are like literally going to be your best friend to show them what to do. And you can fade them out. Eventually in middle school, I had the same kids for 3 years. By the third year I had them, I transitioned them to only words. They didn't need pictures anymore, but it was still a visual schedule. It was just up on the board with words. So, Heather, what about middle school? What would you do?
Yeah, I literally do all those things, all the modeling, all the visuals, all those things into place. And the thing I like to do at the beginning of the year is, of course, like being natural about it. Like, hey, we are all going to walk to PE together. Let's all walk together, and like modeling and saying it through, like, I'm going to walk to PE, and whatever it is. And that kind of going with that flow. Something that was big in my room is I wanted to make sure all my students practiced waiting, because sometimes that was really hard, and some kids were ready to go like out the door and other kids were not as ready, especially at dismissal time. And so like something I made them do is they had to sit and wait until everybody was ready. And that was a big expectation of that I wanted to put in place, because waiting is hard when you have to wait for the bus or wait at McDonald's or whatever it is that we're doing. That was a natural time that some students packed up faster than others, with the modeling and the whole thing. And, you do the whole instruction part, and other kids were just speedy and ready to go. And I was like, okay, well, you have to sit and wait until Sam is ready to go, and whatever it was. And so that was something that was really important to me too. And then I always would do like a little scavenger hunt at the beginning of the school year and be like, hey, let's go find the library. So this was a great like first or second day of school kind of thing, and be like, who knows where the library is? And then we all kind of go and try to find it. And then once we got to the library, of course, I'd tell our librarian that we were coming, and I would say, hey, like, we're going to come second session. Can you give us a tour of the library and what the expectations are? And so she would take 5-10 minutes to walk us around, show us where all the books are, how to check out a book, how to return a book, how to ask for a Chromebook or an iPad or something if they needed to borrow those. And so finding that natural time too, like, I'm not going to walk you down to lunch when it's not lunchtime. But if we need to go see where the lunchroom is, just so you know when it comes on later on this day, we can, but I'm not going to walk you through the whole lunch routine at 8 a.m. when you get in the building, because that's not a natural time that you would eat lunch. You might get confused. So finding, again, those natural times was something that I really love to do, and kind of like make it a game and make it fun of like, this is how we walk in the hallway. Da, 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 da. And so, yes, it's middle school, but sometimes having fun with them too helped lighten the mood a bit too. So, Jen, what about high school or maybe that older group of students? What have you done?
So a lot of what you all said is pretty much what you could do in high school as well. Of course, we're going to look for a little bit more of a mature aspect to it, right? We're going to, maybe our visuals aren't cartoon characters. They're real photos of the things in the classroom or in the school. Maybe some of the routines and procedures that we're working on are a little more advanced than what may be going on in an early childhood special ed placement type program. And when I say more advanced, maybe we don't have to talk about how to walk down the hallway, because we've been doing it for 10 years and now we're good. But when we're walking down the hallway, we can talk about things like if somebody says hello to you, you can work on some social skills and implement that with the students. If, another teacher's walking by and they say hello, take that naturalistic moment, like Heather was saying, and teach that as a routine or a procedure. That's something else that you can add on to how we walk down the hallway, right? So thinking of those types of things, especially in high school transition, trying to get them to interact with their peers as much as possible if they're out in the different gen ed settings, lunch, hallways, any of the classes that they are integrated in or included in as well. So talking about those things. The other things I think of with high school and transition that's really important to make sure when you're working on routines and procedures is I always felt it was important for my students to understand the why, right? Because they are moving on. They are, at the last few years of their school career and getting ready potentially for other things, whether it's a job, whether it's moving, where they're living. If they're not going to stay at home, they're going to go maybe to some kind of a facility, group home, residential placement, whatever that situation is. And the most important thing you can do is individualize that. So don't just go to the whole class and go, so when you all get a job one day. No, look at each of those students. Obviously, you're talking with your IEP team. It's probably already written into the IEP. I know in the state I am, we start transition planning way ahead of the high school years. So it's information you can get talking with the families, but finding out those skills that will then kind of guide the routines and procedures that you're going to work on with those students. So if I have a student I know that's going to get a job and they're going to have to clock in and out every day, I'm going to make that one of the routines or procedures that I'm going to do in my classroom. They come in off the bus, they're going to pretend to clock in or clock out in some fashion. Or if they are going to work at a restaurant and their job is going to be to clear the dishes off the table, guess what? At the cafeteria, maybe it's their job to clear their and their peers' dishes off the table. So really tailoring those routines and things that you're working on with the students at that level, I feel like should be more functional as much as possible. Doesn't mean you still don't teach them to raise their hand or to walk quietly in the hallways or, how to ask to go to the bathroom or use the bathroom. But I feel like you can add some real world experience into those routines and procedures, and especially make it super individualized and tailored to what that student's specifically going to need as they move on and out of school.
Yeah, I love that forward thinking to try to be like, let's prepare them for the job that they are being set up for, or the environment, or we do a lot of the same at my school. Is we really look forward to what's the size of the group of participants that are going to be in there, and what's the staffing ratio to that, because as independent as we can get them is really the goal. So I love that. Speaking of independence, can we chat a little bit more about using visual schedules or visual aids, or any more labels that we can use for assisting our students in their environment? Jen?
Yeah, so we kind of talked about making sure you have space in your room for these things. And Ashley talked quite a bit about how she labels everything and color codes it, which I also used to color code my classroom. I didn't do it the first few years because I thought it was a lot of work for no good reason. And then I finally bit the bullet and did it. And it was amazing. I would say the last 3-4 years I was in self-contained classroom, we did it, and it was awesome because every staff member knew whose stuff was whose, every kid knew whose stuff. I even had students, we would have binders that were color coded, and every student had a binder, and we'd go and say it was time to sit at a table, but everybody was supposed to grab their binder first. Well, all of my friends in the class, whoever's binder was still on the shelf over there, everybody else would be like, we know that's yours, Sam, go get your binder. So they were like peer helping each other, to do what they needed to do, which was also kind of nice because, it wasn't just me all the time giving the directions. But so if you haven't thought about color coding yet, I highly recommend it. When you're incorporating your visuals, your schedules, your labels, make sure you keep them accessible. I know we talked about that a little bit, but they must be accessible to students. You cannot put them too high. Don't put them behind a cabinet where students can't get to them, especially if it's for communication, if it's their schedule that they're using to figure out where they're going. If you're hiding it behind a cabinet door, how are they going to get to it? How are they going to be independent in reading their schedule themselves if you're hiding it from them? Making sure you're labeling everything, because that's going to help with building some of that independence. So if all the students, I was talking about those binders, there's a label there that says, even if it's a symbol that you teach them means something, go put it on the shelf with the star. Okay. So that's a direction. They have to interact and take that in receptively from you first, which is a great skill functionally for the rest of their lives. Just because they may never see another shelf with a star on it again does not mean that that's not important for them to do. So thinking of labels and visuals that way and how it can build some independence for students. Ashley talked about sit spots. I used to have feet prints right in front of my classroom door for showing how to line up, even in a middle school classroom. And so all of those things are definitely going to help to create a classroom space that's going to be easier for you. I know a few things I used as well were things like I had a sensory room. So I had a visual that showed how many kids were allowed in the sensory room at one time. Most of the times it was one. Maybe I'd be nice and let 2 or 3 go in there if I knew they could, behave appropriately, or if they needed an adult, we would have one go over and hang with them, but they would have to put their names up. And then we taught the students, if there's too many names, like if there's not enough slots left for you to put your name up there, it's closed. Like you can't go in there, kind of a thing. So thinking about how you can do that, because if you're teaching a lesson or progress monitoring with another student, you don't want to have to get up out of your seat to go tell somebody they can't go into the sensory room. You teach that ahead of time about if the slots are filled up, it's closed, pick something else for a break choice. And using visuals to do that is an easy way to kind of take you out of the equation and build some independence there.
Yeah, I love all of that. Because we want our students to be as independent as possible. We want to pull ourselves out of that. And those visuals really are helpful to get to that point. So I'm going to chat a little bit about that sensory space that I kind of talked about, or a quiet space, a calming corner, whatever you want to call it. And because I feel like a lot of the things that we've been talking about can be pricey. Like, got to get packing tape, you got to get color coding, all those binders that can be color coded. Like, don't feel overwhelmed. I really want to say that, because my first year, hot mess express, unmatching things, half broken things, because you just do, you piece it together, and over time you do accumulate things. And so yes, you can do the color coding and you can do those other parts. A lot of the times I spray painted things if I wanted them different colors, which came a lot cheaper than buying them all in different colors, especially if it's a big furniture. So before I get way too off track, I just needed to put that little caveat in there, because I know it can be really overwhelming, especially in your first couple years, like feeling like this is so pricey. Start with one area that you really want to grow and have, that you feel is the most important. And if it is a calming space, put your money and time into that, because we want our students to be regulated. And if that's what's going to take to get them regulated, let's do that. So I would use something just as simple as a beanbag chair. Ask your school if they have the funds for that. There's a lot of those bungee chairs that you can get 15 to 20 bucks, sometimes pretty cheap. Again, looking at all those places that we can get them for a lot cheaper, even if they're gently used. Like, use them for a couple months until they break and then move on. So yes, I usually find a space in my classroom that is away from desks, away from technology, away from the group, as best as we can, because I want that space to be separate so that a student can go there to decompress for whatever the reason they need. If it is take a nap, because I've had students take a nap in the classroom as well, I want that space to be as quiet as possible with less distractions. So yeah, a beanbag was something I had. You could do just pillows and blankets. I had found, actually, my family had like giant black pillows, and they were like fuzzy, and my students loved them. So I had 2 of them in my classroom, and that just became like the crash pad, and they would just like lay their bodies on it, before we had beanbags or a crash pad, because we all know those things can get pricey. So you just piece it together. And we just honestly had a gymnastics mat that was given to us from the local park district. And I would use this gymnastics mat as the bottom of my little sensory corner or quiet corner, so that we could have that space be padded and comforted if needed. If a student just needed to pound on the floor for a little bit, they were pounding on the mat, and I felt better than pounding on a hard floor or a carpet. So really just thinking about what's best for your students and what they need. Obviously, at some point soon, if not already, you'll be reading through IEPs and seeing what they need, and just really kind of take that into consideration, because you don't want to just throw a bunch of like metal chairs there if you know a student is going to throw. It's going to be soft and cushiony. You might even have some like fidgets. So a little bin of materials that they can manipulate or play with or watch or see or whatever it is. I also know I've seen classrooms that have like the sequence walls where they'll move it one way or the other way. So again, if that's something you want to do, put the money into it. You can totally do that. If not, get a pillow instead. The pillows do the same thing, and those are at the dollar spot right now for Target all the time. So just find them there. So yeah, just keep finding those things and think about your students' needs. And as the school year goes on, you can build it. So all right, so now that we've talked a little bit about visuals and a little quiet corner, Ashley, do you want to touch more about assistive technology and how to make sure that those students are have it easily accessible and readily available for them when they need it?
Yes. So Jen touched a little bit on it, and I know I have, and I think you have too, Heather. But so what I did is I had a poster sized core board that was in the front of my room that was accessible at all times. It was relatively big. My district has a place where you can go get them, blown up, like the large boards. We use, I can't remember. Give me a minute. I'll think about it. I'll come back. Cannot think of what it's called right now. But we also had small laminated ones that were lamp, that looked like the lamp, because that's what we use typically in our classroom. They were everywhere. Like, I had extras in every single kid's cubby that needed one. I had them on the wall of every single center. I had them in the middle of the table. One thing I want to get better at this year is my mentor last year. She in the art center had a binder, and she had a literal picture of every single thing that they used. And then she had on the front, she would pull out and have the kids that were nonverbal hand it to her or touch or something like that. And that was fantastic. I just literally held the items in front of them because I was like, I don't have time to do that right now. So just like Heather said, Rome wasn't built in a day. Do what you can do. So I'm like, do you want the red marker or the blue marker? Like I literally held the objects in front of the child. That also works. But then, like I said, every single center had even just like a core board, like kitchen had different things we would talk about depending on the theme. We would print a core board to go with that. And when we were doing a book, I would go on to lesson picks. That's what it's called. That's what my district pays for. Lesson picks. And we would print, like if you give a mouse a cookie, I would print a core board or I would make a core board. They literally just need to be everywhere. And I also had a classroom iPad, which I was very blessed to have. It's not typical, but we had one for LAMP that we would use with kids. Only one of my students had an AAC device, and that was a very long process. They didn't get it till April, and I started pushing for that in October. So we had a classroom iPad that we would use with the students. I think it's a GoTalk. That's within like the 9 buttons. We did use that a lot with students. Sometimes we would just literally have a visual in front of them that said yes and no. And that was their communication. And I only asked them yes or no questions to begin with. And then we like obviously broadened that. So like Jen said, if your kids are 6 feet tall, don't put the core board on the floor. Like my little babies are pint size. I love them. Everything was lower for them. But if your kids are in high school, don't put it lower. Put it at eye level and where it's accessible for them. And make sure you're showing them, oh no, you forgot your core board today. Like, let me show you where you can get an extra one, and make sure your para, your SLP, OT, PT, whoever comes to your room knows where the extra ones are so they can grab one and walk around. I mean, I literally had probably 30 Velcroed around my room like it was wallpaper. So it was perfect.
Yeah, I love all of that. I think one thing that we haven't really touched on that actually you were just saying, is your related service. The other people and the other staff in your building can help you. So use your paraprofessionals for back to school season too. So if you want them to set up a calm corner for you, great. If you want them to make visuals for you, great. Show them how to use lesson picks or board maker or symbol sticks or whatever you're using to make those visuals so that you don't have to do it all by yourself, because I don't want you to feel like you are alone. So yeah, if you are feeling super overwhelmed and this was not helpful for you and you're like, no, I just need somebody to talk through it, like you can reach out to any of us and we would gladly talk you through like what you can do to start with back to school, because it can be very overwhelming and stressful. Again, we all remember that first feeling when we walk into a classroom after we got our keys and we're like, yay, what do I do? And like, who do I go to tell me what to do? And you just have to figure it out. So again, if we are here, if you need any help or support, we've been through it for many years. All of us, we have, again, over 50 years of experience all together. So just reach out and we'll answer any of your questions. Again, you can leave any questions below this live if you're watching it recorded, or you can find the Q&A on Sunday. We will record all of the questions and make sure you get the answers that you need, because maybe somebody else has those same questions. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you soon.